A millionaire returned home only to be startled by the sound of his daughter crying out from the upper floor. As he raced upstairs, the scene before him nearly brought him to his knees. His petite daughter was carrying her paralyzed younger brother on her back, scrubbing the floor, while his new wife stood over them, scolding them with terrifying intensity. In that moment, he rushed in and took decisive action. Please relax and join me in listening to this heartwarming and touching story. I hope you will feel inspired, find happiness, and deepen your sense of empathy as you listen. Finally, I hope this serves as a catalyst to help you sleep better tonight. And let us begin. On a morning in early April, the road leading to the northern suburbs of Seattle glistened lightly after a night of rain. A silver Tesla glided past rows of evergreens, reflecting the soft early sunlight. Richard Carter sat behind the wheel, his face beaming with satisfaction. At 45, a successful entrepreneur in the medical technology field, he held on to the belief that this would be the start of a beautiful new chapter for his family. In the back seat, young Evelyn hugged her worn-out teddy bear, her forehead resting against the glass as she watched the houses drift by. "We're here, sweetheart. This is our new home," Richard said, his voice full of excitement. The iron gates opened automatically, revealing a white mansion with a small fountain in the courtyard, a wide porch, and rows of purple roses planted in straight lines. On the porch, a woman stood waiting. Melissa, 32, blonde with a slender figure, flashed a soft smile as Richard parked the car. She walked over, opened the door for him, and then bent down to greet Evelyn. "Hello, Evelyn. I'm so happy you're coming home today." Evelyn nodded slightly, gripping her teddy bear tighter. Inside, Martha, the elderly housekeeper, was directing the movers with boxes. She had worked for the Carter family for over 10 years, having cared for Evelyn since she was in the cradle. When she saw Melissa take the little girl's hand to lead her away, a flicker of worry crossed her eyes. Richard patted Martha gently on the shoulder. "I'm leaving the house to these two wonderful women. I trust Melissa will make this place feel very warm." Martha offered only a faint smile and did not reply. Evelyn walked around the house. Everything was strange and gleaming. The staircase curved elegantly, and a crystal chandelier cast light onto polished wooden steps. The kitchen was 3 times the size of the old house where she used to live with her mother. Richard introduced every room, talking about plans to build a reading library, before stopping in front of a pink room on the 2nd floor. "This is your room. Melissa chose everything." The little girl replied softly, "Thank you, Daddy." Lunch was served shortly after. Melissa set out a salad, roasted chicken, and whole wheat bread. Richard praised everything lavishly, talking about expanding his company to Europe and promising that if successful, the whole family would take a vacation to Hawaii. Evelyn sat in the middle of the table, unsure whether to look at her father or the new woman who kept smiling. The sound of silverware touching the plates seemed louder than any spoken words. As evening fell, Richard took Evelyn out to the backyard, where there was a flat, grassy lawn. A small walker was placed nearby. Inside it sat Ethan, Richard, and Melissa's 2-year-old son, laughing with a soft ball in his hands. Evelyn hesitated before approaching. "Can I play with you?" she asked quietly. Ethan laughed and threw the ball toward his sister. For the first time all day, Evelyn genuinely smiled. Richard watched the 2 children, wrapping his arm around Melissa's shoulders, his eyes full of contentment. That night, Melissa prepared a small celebration. Candlelight reflected in the wine glasses and on the face of the woman Richard believed was the comfort of his life. He spoke of new contracts and how the company needed him in New York for a few days. "Just a week," he said. "I promise I'll be back soon." Evelyn only heard half the sentence, not understanding why her heart suddenly tightened. After dinner, Melissa took Evelyn up to her room. The pink room featured a white bed, a small desk, and brand new dolls. "Do you like it?" "Yes, thank you." Melissa placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, holding it there a second longer than normal. "Good, get some rest now." The door closed. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, touching her old teddy bear, listening to the muffled voices of her father and Melissa talking downstairs. In the living room, Richard was on a call with a partner. His voice became urgent. The promise of 1 week turned into 10 days. When the call ended, he turned to see Melissa standing in the doorway. Are you really leaving? I have to, but I'll be back soon. I know you'll take care of Evelyn. You can rest assured I will care for her as if she were my own. Soft footsteps echoed from the stairs. Evelyn stopped halfway down, looking to see Melissa touching her father's cheek. She didn't understand why, but deep inside she suddenly felt as though something had just been taken away. That night, a gentle breeze blew through the window frame. Evelyn couldn't sleep, listening to the floorboards creak softly. A shadow passed by her door. The doorknob turned slightly, then stopped. She held her breath, watching the faint yellow light reflect on the ceiling, daring not to move. The next morning, Richard prepared to leave. He wore his suit, buttoning it carefully. Evelyn stood by the door, her hands hidden behind her back. Daddy will be back soon. You must listen to Mom, okay? Yes. He bent down, kissing his daughter on the forehead, his smile warm but hurried. Melissa brought his suitcase to the car, speaking briefly about his flight schedule. Martha stood by the door, watching in silence. As the Tesla rolled out through the gates, Evelyn remained at the second-floor window. The wind blew the curtains and the teddy bear in her hand swayed slightly. Down in the courtyard, Melissa looked up, the smile on her lips no longer gentle as it had been in the morning. She pulled the blinds shut, her eyes changing color. Without a word, she walked straight toward the kitchen, the sound of her heels echoing on the stone floor. The mansion fell silent again, save for the grandfather clock counting the rhythm of time. Evelyn stood alone in the hallway, watching the woman's shadow disappear behind the door. She did not know that this silence would mark the beginning of the longest days of her childhood. Melissa reappeared after a few minutes, holding a cup of coffee, her eyes avoiding the little girl. You should get changed. There are many things to organize. Yes, I know, Evelyn replied softly, bending down to pick up the teddy bear she had dropped. Martha stepped out of the laundry room, handing the girl a handkerchief. Keep this with you. You'll need it. Evelyn looked up, not understanding the meaning, but nodded anyway. As the sun climbed higher, the large clock in the living room chimed 9 times. Melissa walked past, placing a list of chores on the table, her gaze cold and decisive. Your father's busy with meetings all day. You stay home with me. I will instruct you on what needs to be done. Evelyn squeezed the handkerchief, nodding. I will try my best. Melissa didn't reply, just turned away. Martha stood on the step, silently watching the two of them. A breeze drifted through, shaking the thin curtain before the window, casting swaying patches of light onto the floor. Evelyn turned back, intending to ask Martha something, but hesitated. The older woman simply placed a hand on the girl's shoulder and turned away. The sound of the kitchen door closing was dry and heavy, echoing through the house. Evelyn stood motionless in the hallway, listening to Melissa's footsteps moving slowly across the wooden floor, stopping right behind her. Evelyn, come here and help me. On the first morning without Richard, sunlight crept through the window onto the kitchen wall. Evelyn started at the sound of the refrigerator opening and the chopping on the cutting board. The little girl walked down the stairs, hair messy, still clutching her teddy bear. Melissa turned, glanced briefly, and pointed to the table. Since you're up, help me prepare breakfast. Get the bowls, get the plates, and learn how to brew coffee. Evelyn placed the teddy bear on a chair and reached for a bowl. The glass slipped from her fingers, crashing to the floor and shattering. Silence filled the space for a few seconds. Melissa bent down, picked up the pieces one by one, and placed them in the trash. You should learn to be more careful. I don't like the sound of things breaking. Evelyn nodded, standing still, eyes fixed on the tile floor. At noon, Melissa hosted a friend named Laura. She wore a cream-colored dress, pale lipstick, and smelled faintly of perfume. Evelyn cleared a glass of water, filling it too high, and it spilled over the edge of the table. Melissa grabbed a napkin, wiped it up, and smiled at her friend. The girl's a bit shy. I'm training her to help with housework, also so she learns to be responsible for herself. Laura looked at Evelyn and whispered, She's lovely. She just needs a little more confidence. Evelyn bowed her head, replying softly, Yes, I will try. When Laura left, Melissa sat back at the table and took out a paper to write a chore list. Mop the downstairs floor, fold the laundry, watch Ethan. Do them in order, don't skip anything. Evelyn looked at the long list, unsure where to start. Melissa pushed her chair back and stood up, adding, Martha will come at noon, but I want you to do your part first. Your brother needs rest, so don't be noisy." "I understand." In the afternoon, Ethan grew fussy while Melissa was out shopping. Evelyn held her brother, trying to make formula as instructed, but the water was too hot. She hurriedly set the bottle down and some milk spilled onto the counter. The sound of the door lock turned and Melissa walked in, seeing the scene before her. "What are you doing?" Evelyn stammered. "I just wanted to comfort him. My hand slipped." Melissa walked over, cleaned everything up, her voice monotone. "You'll get used to it. Your brother needs you more than anyone." Evelyn nodded, biting her lip, her hands still trembling as she picked Ethan up again. Later, Martha was cleaning the living room and saw Evelyn mopping the floor, her small frame dwarfed by the vast room. She intended to step in and help, but Melissa called out from the stairs, "Let the girl learn responsibility. She needs to learn how to work." Martha froze, said nothing, placed her bucket down nearby and walked away. Evelyn kept her head down, continuing to mop, each movement slow and deliberate. That evening, Richard video called. Melissa fixed her hair and pulled Evelyn to sit next to her. "Daughter, do you miss Daddy?" "I miss you, Daddy," Evelyn replied, forcing a smile even though her hands stung from the dish soap. Richard looked through the screen, seeing mother and daughter sitting close, and he smiled. "I'm so proud of my family." After the call ended, Melissa turned off the screen and looked at Evelyn. "You see? If you know how to behave, your father will be happy." In the days that followed, Evelyn gradually got used to cooking, cleaning, and watching Ethan. Melissa rarely came downstairs. She stayed in the reading room, listening to music, occasionally calling down, "Don't make noise." Evelyn didn't reply, just clenched her hands. One evening, Martha was preparing to set the table when Melissa told her to leave early. "Let Evelyn practice housework tonight. I want her to get used to helping others." Evelyn carried the tray of food, hands shaking, and set it on the table. The soup bowl tipped, liquid spilling onto the edge of the plate. She hurriedly wiped it up. "You are clumsy, just like your mother," Melissa said as she stood up to put away the dishes. Evelyn fell silent, gathering the spoons one by one. When Martha went upstairs, she left a cup of hot milk on the table. Evelyn sat before an old notebook her mother had left behind, writing on a blank page. "Dad said I have a new mom, but she isn't like the person in the photos." On the weekend morning, Melissa took the two children to the mall. She chose a series of new clothes for Ethan, bought shoes and toys, then stopped at a children's store. Evelyn stood behind, looking around, her hand clutching her bag strap. "Do you want anything?" Melissa asked without looking. "No, ma'am, I just want to buy something for my brother." Melissa replied shortly, "Good." When they got home, she handed the bags to Martha. "Organize Ethan's room," and Evelyn cleaned the kitchen. There are many things scattered on the table. Evelyn put things away and stood at the sink. Melissa turned around, watching her from behind. "You must know one thing," she said. "If you were better behaved, your biological mother might not have left so early." Evelyn froze, letting the wet cloth drop into the sink. The water ran over her hands, cold and stinging. She turned around, but Melissa had already walked out of the kitchen, her posture straight, not looking back. The wall clock ticked steadily. Evelyn bent down, picked up the cloth, and wiped the remaining water spots. In the living room, Ethan laughed softly with Martha, while the little girl stood alone, hands still wet, not understanding why her throat felt so tight. Upstairs, Melissa walked down the hall, opened the door to her private room, and closed it gently. Evelyn looked up, wanting to say something, but her voice couldn't make a sound. She placed the cloth back on the rack, took a deep breath, and walked toward the stairs. "Evelyn, come down here for a moment." Melissa's voice rang out from the kitchen area below. The girl paused, turned around, her hand still resting on the wooden banister. From that day on, Evelyn woke up earlier than usual. She tiptoed down to the kitchen, trying to finish all the chores before Melissa woke up. In the large house, the sound of her small slippers blended with the ticking clock and the wind on the porch. Every morning, Evelyn set the table, aligning the spoons and forks perfectly, washed Ethan's milk bottles, and mopped the floor again. Everything had to be done before 8 o'clock, because if she was late with even one small task, Melissa would give her a look that made the little girl tremble all day. Melissa didn't need to say much, just a glance, and Evelyn understood what she had to do. She memorized every detail, from how to place the coffee cup to the position of the folded napkin on the table. The house had almost no spoken voices. There was only the steady hum of the washing machine, Ethan's sounds in the nursery, and the wall clock. One afternoon, light rain fell on the porch. Martha asked to leave early for a family matter. Evelyn stayed with Melissa and Ethan. She finished cleaning the kitchen, her back aching, and sat on a chair to rest for a moment. Melissa walked out of the reading room, stopping to look at the chair the girl was sitting on. "Finish your work before you rest." Evelyn bolted up, grabbing the rag, bowing her head. "I'm sorry. I'll get back to it right away." Ethan's crying echoed from upstairs. Evelyn started to run up, but Melissa blocked her way. "He must learn to self-soothe. You cannot spoil him." Evelyn stopped, eyes fixed on the stairs. Ethan's crying dragged on, becoming hoarse. She stood for a few more seconds, and when Melissa turned away, she rushed up, scooped her brother into her arms, and comforted him with a little song her biological mother used to sing. Ethan stopped crying, grabbing his sister's collar, his eyes drooping. Evelyn put him down, tucked him in, and went back down to finish mopping. In the evening, Melissa prepared dinner. Evelyn placed each plate, mentally calculating the order as usual. When Richard video called, Melissa fixed her hair and placed the phone in front of Evelyn. "Daddy, I'm doing well. You look grown up. Is Ethan being good?" "Yes, he's good," Melissa interjected. "The girl is learning to take care of her brother very well. You don't need to worry." Richard laughed, added a few words, and reminded her to listen to her mother. When the call ended, Melissa turned off the screen and set the phone down. "You see, if you know how to behave, your father will be happy," Evelyn whispered. "Yes." Night fell, and the rain grew heavier. Melissa told Evelyn to take some towels down to the basement, saying she needed them immediately. The girl nodded and ran down. The heavy wooden door opened and a damp smell rose up. A dim yellow bulb cast light on the stairs. Evelyn walked slowly, searching in the corner cabinet. As she bent down, the sound of the door closing clicked behind her. The basement was darker. Evelyn knocked lightly, calling, "Mom, I got them!" No answer. She knocked harder, the sound echoing in the cold space. Time passed and her legs trembled with fear. When the lock finally clicked and light from the hallway flooded in, Melissa stood there, holding a cup of tea. "Did you find them?" "Yes, I found them." Evelyn hugged the towels tight, walking past. Melissa said nothing more, just closed the door. That night, Martha returned and found Evelyn sitting on the stairs, dark circles under her eyes. She brought the girl a cup of hot milk. "You should drink this, then rest. Everything will pass." "Will Dad be back soon, Martha?" "He will see eventually. You just need to try a little harder." Evelyn fell silent, holding the glass with both hands, staring at the steaming milk. The next morning, Richard returned unexpectedly. The sound of the car parking in the yard froze the house. Melissa went out to greet him, her face shifting in an instant, quickly transforming into a smile. "You're back so early." "The meeting was postponed. I missed the kids." Evelyn ran down from the stairs, stopping when she saw her father holding Ethan. "Daddy?" Richard opened his arms. "Come here, daughter." She ran to him but stopped a step away. He rubbed her head, not noticing her small hands covered in scratches. During the meal, Richard talked about his business trip and new partners. Melissa sat beside him, nodding occasionally, serving food to her husband. Evelyn sat quietly. "Have you been good lately?" "Yes, I do what Mom says." "Very good. I'm preparing for a trip to Europe. It might be a bit longer." Evelyn looked at Melissa. She was still smiling, saying, "Focus on your work. Everything at home is fine." Richard placed his hand on the table, his eyes momentarily hesitating. "I wanted to bring the whole family, but the weather there is cold. Maybe another time. You go. Evelyn and Martha are here with me." Evelyn looked down at her plate. The piece of pie on it had gone cold. After the meal, Richard went up to check his luggage. Evelyn followed him. "Daddy, can I call you every day?" "Of course. I'll call before your bedtime. I'm afraid Mom will be sad. Melissa loves you, don't worry." Evelyn nodded slightly, holding her teddy bear. Richard gave her a hug and turned away, not realizing the eyes behind his back were filled with anxiety. Before leaving the house, he instructed Martha, "Try to let Melissa rest more. Ethan needs careful attention." "Yes, sir." Melissa stood on the porch, seeing her husband off. When the car disappeared, she didn't turn back inside immediately. Rain fell lightly. She ran her hand along the iron railing, her gaze distant. Inside, Evelyn stood on the step, hugging her teddy bear tight. Martha walked by, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You should go to your room." "Martha, how long will Dad be gone?" "Just a while." Evelyn nodded, walking slowly up the stairs. From behind, the sound of the iron gate closing echoed. After Richard left, Melissa called Martha to the living room and presented a new schedule. "From now on, you only need to come for half the day. Evelyn will handle the rest. She needs to learn how to help around the house." Martha hesitated, but eventually nodded. Evelyn stood near the door, hearing everything. She dared not say a word, simply bending down to wipe the floor again, even though it was already clean. In the morning, Melissa inspected every corner. She left a note specifying, "Clean the living room, fold laundry, prepare lunch, watch Ethan." Evelyn read it over and over, writing tiny notes in the corner to remember. She did each task carefully, but every time Melissa walked by, her heart tightened. Ethan had been weaker lately, fussy all morning. Evelyn picked him up, walking around the room until he fell asleep. She sat by the window, retelling the stories her biological mother used to tell. Her quiet voice blended with Ethan's steady breathing. The scene made Martha smile softly as she passed by, but upstairs, Melissa stood behind the glass, gripping her teacup tightly. That evening, Richard video called. He was happy to see the two children together. "You're so good, Evelyn. Ethan looks healthier," Melissa interjected, saying, "Of course, she learns fast. I think Evelyn is starting to truly grow up." Evelyn looked down, hands resting on her shirt hem. The call ended, and Melissa put the phone on the table. "Tomorrow, prepare breakfast. It must be done before Ethan wakes up." The next morning, Evelyn woke up while it was still dark. She started the stove, toasted bread, beat eggs, and made milk for her brother. Her hands shook with fatigue. Oil from the pan popped, burning her skin. She pulled her hand back, hiding the red mark in her pocket as she heard Melissa's footsteps. "Is breakfast ready?" "Yes, I just finished." "Bring it up. Don't let it get cold." When Martha arrived, she noticed the blister on Evelyn's hand. "What happened to you?" "It's nothing, Martha. My hand just slipped." Before Martha could say more, Melissa's voice rang from upstairs. "Evelyn, take Ethan for a walk. Don't let him cry." Evelyn pushed Ethan's stroller into the garden. The air was crisp and a breeze blew gently. She bent down, pointing out birds on the fence to him. Ethan chuckled, clapping his hands at the air. Evelyn laughed with him, forgetting her fear for the first time that day. On the second floor, Melissa slightly pulled back the curtain, looking down for a long time, her gaze still. At noon, Evelyn washed dishes, folded clothes, and changed bedsheets. As she put away the pillows, Melissa walked by, glanced quickly, then stopped. "The folds aren't straight. Do it again." "I'm sorry, I'll do it right away." "Your father always likes things tidy. You should learn that if you want him to be proud." Night came, and Evelyn prepared a bath for Ethan. She forgot to fold the towel as listed. Melissa walked in, arms crossed. "You must learn to be perfect. Your father hates carelessness." "I'm sorry, I was so tired. I'll do it now." "No one is tired when they know what their job is," Melissa said, then walked out, leaving the door half open. Evelyn sat down, wiping every water spot on the floor, her eyes stinging. The next day, she tiptoed to place a bowl of oatmeal on the breakfast table. Ethan held his sister's hand, smiling. Evelyn fed him spoonful by spoonful. Melissa walked through the hallway and paused. The sight of the two children made her stand still. A moment later, she walked in, taking the bowl from Evelyn's hand. "He needs to rest, and you don't." Evelyn bowed her head, silently wiping the table. When Martha arrived in the afternoon, she intended to ask about things, but Melissa ordered her to clean the living room. Martha only had time to stroke Evelyn's hair, whispering, "Just try a little longer." Evelyn nodded, hiding her blistered hand behind her back. Late in the afternoon, Melissa sat in the office checking her phone. Richard sent a text. "I might have to stay longer. The European project is urgent. I trust you to handle everything." Melissa typed a reply. "Rest assured, everything at home is fine." Evelyn sat on the stairs, listening to the rhythmic tapping of the keyboard. She went back to her room, looking out at the backyard. Ethan was fast asleep. Martha had gone home. The house was silent save for the patter of rain outside the window. The girl sat on the step, hugging a pillow to her chest. From upstairs, the light in Melissa's office was still on. The door was ajar. Sounds of papers turning and a pen touching the desk echoed. Evelyn watched without looking away, her heart sinking. Melissa walked out of the room, seeing the girl still sitting there. "Why aren't you asleep?" "I'm waiting for Ethan to wake up for his milk." "No need. He has to get used to it himself." "But he's little." Melissa paused, her eyes cold. "Do you want to argue with me?" Evelyn shook her head, voice small. "I just want to help. Helping means doing exactly what I say." She turned away, leaving Evelyn standing still. The hallway light cast the girl's small shadow against the wall, trembling slightly. She sat on the bottom step, hugging the pillow, listening to the clock strike 12. No one spoke in the house. Ethan slept peacefully, while Melissa still paced upstairs. Evelyn looked at the phone on the table next to the sofa, screen dark. She thought of her father, of his promise to call every night, wondering if it was morning on the other side of the world. Melissa walked down, picked up the phone and put it in her pocket. "It's late. Go to sleep." Evelyn stood up, walking slowly up the stairs. At the last step she paused, looking back at Melissa. The woman stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, her gaze not directed at the girl. Evelyn opened her mouth, intending to say something, but no words came out. In the middle week of May, the Carter estate became bustling. Melissa hired people to decorate the garden, set up small tents, arrange chairs, and lay out a long buffet table for a charity party Richard had promised to sponsor. Evelyn followed Martha to help move tables, polish glasses, running back and forth in the sun, her shirt damp with sweat. When Melissa walked by, the girl stood up straight, waiting for orders. "Clean this section thoroughly. Guests are arriving soon." "Yes, I'll finish right away." "Don't let anyone see you looking messy. Your father wants tonight to be perfect." In the living room, Richard was calling from overseas, speaking to Melissa about the guest list. "I want you to host in my place. This party is very important." "I know, don't worry. Remind Evelyn to dress neatly. I want everyone to see our family doing well." "I'll handle it." In the afternoon, when cars began to pull up, decorative lights illuminated the courtyard. Melissa wore a black gown and pearl necklace, smiling at everyone. Evelyn wore a white dress and flat shoes, hair tied back, standing next to Martha at the reception table. An older woman stopped, looked at Evelyn, and whispered, "You're Grace's daughter, aren't you? I used to know your mother." Evelyn nodded, voice small. "Yes, I am Evelyn." "You look just like her." Melissa approached, interjecting with a smile. "You must be mistaken. Grace passed away early and the girl rarely mentions the past." The woman nodded, a look of surprise crossing her face. Throughout the party, Melissa laughed and talked with everyone, mentioning the charity project and Richard's company. When asked, she introduced Evelyn as a good girl, a bit shy but helpful to her mother. Evelyn lowered her head, daring not to look at anyone. Martha stood nearby, trying to help the girl with the heavy tray of pastries. As the crowd grew, Ethan woke up and started crying. Evelyn set the tray down and ran inside. She found a milk bottle and comforted him, just as Melissa walked in, face cold. "What are you doing? Who told you to leave your post?" "He was crying. I just wanted to pick him up." "No one here needs you to show off your kindness. You must remember you represent your father." "I'm sorry. Don't let anyone see you running around. Clean this up and go help Martha." Evelyn placed Ethan in the crib and turned back to wipe up spilled milk. In the mirror, she saw Melissa standing behind her, a forced smile appearing as she heard guests calling from outside. Night fell, and the party neared its end. The older guest from earlier returned, handing Evelyn an embroidered handkerchief. "Keep this. Your mother loved this kind of fabric." Evelyn accepted it with trembling hands, whispering thanks. Melissa appeared nearby, her gaze lingering for a few seconds. When the guests had all gone, Martha cleared the tables. Evelyn helped her gather glasses and mop the floor. Melissa stood at the door, arms crossed. "What did you say to that lady?" "She said she knew my mother." "What did you tell her?" "I didn't tell her anything. Never bring up the past in front of outsiders. They will think this family is unhappy." "But my mother?" "Quiet, I'm speaking seriously. If you open your mouth again, I will send you to an orphanage. You can talk as much as you want there." Evelyn stepped back, eyes wide. Melissa took a step forward, bent down to pick up the last glass, looking away from the girl. "Go to sleep. There is work tomorrow." When Melissa left the kitchen, Martha touched Evelyn's shoulder gently. "Don't be afraid. Just stay quiet, and everything will pass." Evelyn nodded, clutching the handkerchief in her pocket. Night. The house was silent. Evelyn sat by Ethan's bed watching him sleep, then opened the old notebook her mother left. She wrote, "I met someone who knew Mom. Mom, I wish you were still here." In the hallway, soft footsteps approached. The door opened, letting light in. "Not asleep yet?" "I'm almost asleep. Tomorrow wake up early. Your father wants a video call in the morning." "Yes? Remember to wear the pink dress. You look fresher in that color." Melissa closed the door. The latch clicked softly. Evelyn put the notebook under her pillow and lay down. Ethan stirred, his tiny hand touching his sister's wrist. Evelyn held it, closing her eyes. The threat from earlier still echoed in her head, every word clear. When the clock struck 12, the sound of a car leaving the gate was heard. Martha had gone home early. The house held only 3 people. Melissa stood at the second-floor window, looking down at the yard where the string lights still glowed faintly. Evelyn woke in the middle of the night to the sound of wind, thinking she heard whispering in the hallway. But then everything sank back into silence. The next morning, she woke early, preparing breakfast as usual. Melissa walked into the kitchen, seeing everything ready. "You remember what I said?" "Yes, I remember." "Good. Today I'm going out. You stay home, watch your brother, and finish cleaning the living room." "I understand." When Melissa left the house, Evelyn looked around the kitchen. Early light hit the walls. She sat on a chair, pulled out the embroidered handkerchief, and unfolded it. In the corner of the fabric, small text appeared. "Grace, Summer 2015. Evelyn smiled softly, then heard Ethan calling from his room and quickly stood up. At noon, Melissa returned. She saw a drawing on the table, a small sketch Evelyn had just drawn from memory, featuring a mother, a father, and a little girl in the middle. Melissa looked at the drawing, then put it away without a word. Evelyn walked in at that moment, freezing in place. "What is this drawing?" "Just a memory." "Memories don't feed anyone. Learn to work." "I just want to remember Mom." "No need. From now on, don't draw anymore." Evelyn bent down, picking up a pencil that fell from the table. Melissa walked toward the stairs. "When your father calls tonight, remember to smile. Don't make him ask any questions." The little girl stood still, the drawing trembling in her hand. The lead smudged onto her fingers. Ethan called again from his room, voice small. Evelyn turned, intending to walk away, when Melissa added, voice low, "I don't want to repeat what happened last night. I hope you understand." Evelyn nodded, holding the paper tight. At the stairs, the sound of Melissa's slow footsteps descended. The rain lasted for a week. The sky was a dull gray, water streaming down the windows. Richard was in Europe, sending only a brief text each night. "Are the kids okay?" Melissa replied with 2 words. "All good." She set the phone down, poured more wine, not bothering to look at the screen again. Ethan had a mild cold, sneezing and fussing constantly. Evelyn carried him around the house, rocking him and retelling old stories. "Once upon a time, Mommy took us to the garden, picked apples, and told stories about the sun," she whispered, rubbing his back. Ethan gripped her collar, crying weakly until he fell asleep. Melissa prepared a small party, inviting a few friends over. She stood before the mirror, adjusting her hair, then turned to Evelyn. "Tonight you must help perfectly. No drawing attention, no talking. Understood?" "Yes, I understand." "And don't let anyone see him cry." When guests arrived, laughter filled the living room. Glasses clinked and soft music played. Evelyn carried a tray of pastries, weaving through the crowd, avoiding eye contact. Martha had been sent home early by Melissa. Ethan was upstairs, his small cries echoing down in waves. Evelyn glanced at the clock, anxiety burning inside her. She set the tray on a table and rushed up the stairs. In the room, Ethan was flushed, tears sticky on his cheeks. Evelyn took a warm cloth, wiped his forehead, voice trembling. "Don't cry anymore. I'm here." She wrapped a blanket around him, rocking gently, humming softly. Downstairs, the clatter of glasses and music continued. Melissa suddenly realized Evelyn was missing. She stood up from the table, excused herself with a smile, and left. The sound of high heels clicked steadily on the stairs. Opening the door, she saw a bowl of red wine spilled, a red stain spreading on the carpet. Evelyn stood huddled in the corner, holding Ethan. Melissa said nothing, simply bent down, blotting the spill with a napkin. Evelyn whispered, "I'm sorry, I dropped it." Melissa looked at the carpet, not answering. She stood up, straightened the tablecloth, voice small but sharp. "Go down and clear the table. Guests are leaving soon." Evelyn laid Ethan back down and ran downstairs. Guests were still laughing, oblivious. Melissa returned to the table, smiling socially. "Children are clumsy sometimes, but I'm teaching her to be better," a friend complimented. "She's a good girl, looks lovely." Melissa smiled, pouring more wine. It wasn't until nearly midnight that the guests finally left. The front yard glittered with lights reflecting in the rain. Melissa saw them off, closed the gate, and returned inside. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, holding a rag, dark circles under her eyes. "You thought the work was done?" "I cleared the table and kitchen." "What about the floor?" "I'll mop it right away." "No Martha to help. I want you to do it yourself." Ethan cried weakly from upstairs. Evelyn turned her head. "He still has a fever. Can I finish mopping and go to him?" "No, clean it first." The girl grabbed a bucket, knelt on the floor, and began to wipe. The cold water numbed her hands. A moment later, Ethan's crying grew louder. Evelyn put the rag down, ran up to the room, and carried him down to the kitchen. "Sleep with me, I'll be quick." Ethan rested on her shoulder, drifting off from exhaustion. Evelyn continued to wipe, water trails blurring on the floor under the dim light. Sweat ran down her neck. Her shirt was soaked. Melissa stood at the door, watched for a long time, then said, "Clean that corner again. It's not clean." Evelyn turned, wiping it again. "I wiped it already." "Not enough." As she bent near the table, a bowl of cold oatmeal left near the edge of a tray slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor, food splattering everywhere. The sound was small but distinct in the quiet night. Evelyn froze, eyes wide. She knelt, picking up pieces, wiping the mess. Behind her, footsteps approached. Melissa held a half-finished glass of wine, pausing to look. "You never learned to be careful." "I'm sorry, I'll clean it. Don't apologize, finish it." Ethan stirred on his sister's shoulder. Evelyn held him tight, continuing to wipe. Her small hands shook, the oatmeal smear spreading, cold water soaking her clothes. Melissa placed the glass on the table, poured more wine, Asi's never leaving the scene. "What do you think your father would say if he saw you like this?" Evelyn was silent. He would be disappointed. A filthy, clumsy child who can't do anything right. Evelyn bowed her head lower. "I just want to help. I didn't mean to." "Help? You're making a mess of everything." Melissa bent down, picked up a towel, and threw it at the girl. "Continue. Wipe it all again. I want this floor to shine like a mirror." Evelyn shifted Ethan on her back and knelt, towel in hand, scrubbing every smear. Her breathing was heavy, vision blurred by sweat and fatigue. Ethan nuzzled into her shoulder, voice sleepy. "Sissy, sleep. Just a little more." Wind howled outside, the sound of water sloshing from the small bucket mixing with heavy breathing. Melissa stood still, gripping her wine glass, watching silently. In the yellow light, shadows stretched long across the tiles. Evelyn wiped to the last corner and stopped, collapsing from exhaustion. Melissa stepped closer, looked down, and whispered, "Not clean yet. I have no strength left. Don't make excuses. I didn't teach you so I could hear reasons." The front door burst open. Wind rushed in, carrying the scent of rain. Evelyn startled, looking up. Richard stood right at the threshold, coat soaked, suitcase still in hand. He looked at the scene before him, his daughter kneeling on the floor, carrying her sleeping brother, surrounded by water and spilled food, while his wife stood opposite, wine glass in hand, face calm. Melissa turned, forcing a stiff smile. "You're back earlier than expected?" Richard didn't answer. His gaze moved from the mess on the floor to Evelyn's trembling hands. He set the suitcase down and walked in. Evelyn couldn't stand up yet, still kneeling, looking at her father. She gasped softly, "Daddy." Richard approached, bent down, and helped his daughter up. Ethan was still asleep on her back, cheeks flushed with fever. Melissa set the glass on the table. It's just a misunderstanding. I was teaching her to clean. She spilled food. You arrived just in time to see... Richard raised a hand, cutting her off. He pulled his daughter into an embrace, shielding her head from the rainwater still dripping from his coat. Evelyn shook, her tiny hand clutching his shirt. Melissa took a step toward them, mouth opening to speak, but no sound came out. Richard looked straight at her, his eyes devoid of the warmth they once held. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, dim light reflected on the floor. Evelyn still knelt, carrying Ethan, clutching the wet cloth. Melissa stood silent, fingers tightening around the wine glass. The sound of the door closing softly echoed behind him. Richard stood motionless in the doorway, his breath caught in his throat. The scene before him wiped all sound from his mind. Evelyn was kneeling on the tile floor, clutching a wet rag, Ethan sleeping heavily on her back, her hair plastered to her face, lips turning blue. Around them, water and food were smeared across the floor. Melissa stood near the dining table, wine glass in hand, face devoid of emotion. Richard set his suitcase down, walking slowly inside. What is happening here? Melissa startled, taking a step back. When did you get back? I was just teaching the girl to clean up. She spilled food, as you can see. Teaching her? Richard looked straight at her. Teaching her to kneel on the floor in the middle of the night, carrying her brother on her back while you stand and watch? You're misunderstanding. I didn't force her. She spilled the oatmeal herself and tried to clean it. I just wanted her to learn responsibility. Evelyn looked up, lips trembling. Daddy, I'm sorry I spilled the food. Richard bent down, taking the rag from his daughter's hand, voice choked. No, Evelyn, you did nothing wrong. Melissa placed the wine glass on the table, trying to stay calm. You should listen to me. The girl has had issues from the start. She makes mistakes and then cries. You don't know. While you were gone, Richard interrupted. Enough. The wine glass slipped from Melissa's hand, shattering on the floor. The room fell dead silent, save for the rain and Evelyn's ragged breathing. Richard took off his coat, draping it over his daughter's shoulders. He turned to Melissa, voice low but decisive. Get out of my house. What are you saying? This is our home. You forget that Get out of my house right now. Melissa stood frozen, staring at him unblinking. You trust the word of a child over your wife? Richard didn't answer, just looked at her, eyes cold as steel. She bit her lip, grabbed her purse from the chair, and walked toward the door. Evelyn tried to say something but couldn't make a sound. Melissa turned back, eyes vague, half angry, half empty. The wind rushed through the door as she walked out, hair wild. The sound of the door closing rang out dryly. Richard sat down next to Evelyn, lifting Ethan off her back. Daughter, I'm home. Evelyn burst into tears, sobbing into the silence. I'm sorry, I spilled the food. I didn't clean it in time before Mom came back. It's okay now, I'm here. Ethan breathed raspily, cheeks flushed. Richard placed the boy on the sofa, wrapping a blanket around him. Hurried footsteps sounded from the stairs. Martha ran down, face pale at the scene. Oh God! Sir, what happened? Get me a dry towel and some warm water. Martha ran, bringing towels. She wrapped one around Evelyn, wiping the girl's face. Oh, child, it's okay now. Your father is home. Richard removed his suit jacket, setting it aside. He looked around the room. Wet floor, broken bowl, red wine stain. Every detail hit his eyes like evidence he couldn't ignore. He took a deep breath, voice thick. I let that woman live with my children, in this house. Martha placed a hand on his shoulder. I tried to tell you many times, sir, but I had no proof. The girl never spoke. Evelyn shook her head, eyes wet. I didn't dare. I was afraid Mom would be sad, afraid Dad would be angry at Mom. Richard took her small hand, pressing it gently to his forehead. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I didn't see it. Ethan stirred in the blanket, moaning softly. Martha checked his temperature, whispering, He still has a fever. I'll get medicine. Thank you, Martha. Let me take care of them tonight. Richard picked Evelyn up, placed her on the sofa, and pulled a blanket over her. Rest. You don't need to worry about anything anymore. Daddy, will Mom come back? No, sweetheart. No one can hurt you ever again. Martha returned, placing a cup of water on the table. Richard wiped Evelyn's forehead, eyes never leaving his daughter. From now on, I will be here. I'm not going anywhere. Evelyn nodded slightly, her small hand finding her father's. Richard squeezed it, feeling his daughter's cold skin. A moment later, Ethan woke up, looking around confused. Richard held the boy, voice deep. "Daddy's home, Ethan. Everything is okay." Ethan nuzzled into his shoulder, whispering, "Where's Mom?" "Gone far away, son." The boy didn't ask further, just hugged his father's neck tight. Outside on the porch, rain continued to pour. Light from the house spilled out pale yellow, casting the shadows of the three on the floor. Martha gathered the broken pieces, mopped the floor, the sound of the rag touching tile soft and gentle. Richard sat quietly, staring into space. The whole house was steeped in warmth and the smell of damp rain. He stroked Evelyn's hair, whispering, "From now on, I will take care of you and your brother. No one else. Daddy, don't leave again. I promise." Evelyn rested her head on his chest, drifting off. Ethan fell back asleep too, breathing steadying. Richard looked at the two children, gently kissing each on the forehead. Martha poured more warm water, setting it nearby. "Sir, you should rest a bit." "No, I'll sit here, all night." She nodded, stepping back, eyes sad. Outside, wind whistled across the porch, carrying the sound of water running off the roof tiles. Melissa was walking along the dark road, raincoat flapping, hand clutching her purse. She didn't look back. Inside, Richard bowed his head, holding his daughter closer, watching the table lamp flicker in the draft. He heard every weak heartbeat of Evelyn, every soft breath of Ethan. A strong gust shook the curtain, casting flickering yellow light on his face. "Daddy," Evelyn called out dreamily, "I'm here. I'm cold. I know. I won't let you be cold anymore." He wrapped more blankets around them, holding his child tight. Outside, rain beat hard against the door, then slowed. In the small room, there was only the sound of blended breathing, silent and warm. When Richard looked up at the window, the figure in the yard had vanished. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "No one will touch my children again." The clock struck 1 in the morning. The light softened. Martha turned down the lights and retreated upstairs. Richard remained there, one arm holding Ethan, the other keeping Evelyn in his embrace. The rain stopped completely, leaving only condensation on the glass. Evelyn stirred slightly, moving her lips. "Daddy, don't go anywhere, okay?" Richard bent down, placing his lips on his daughter's wet hair. "No, daughter, I'm home." The sentence barely finished. He looked at the door where the porch light had just gone out, leaving the room immersed in the warmth and breath of his two children. The next morning, the Carter house was submerged in quiet. Dim light filtered through the curtains, illuminating the dining table still bearing traces of the night before. Martha tidied every corner, silently wiping the floor, hands trembling slightly as she saw the broken glass gathered in a corner. Richard sat in his office in front of the computer screen, eyes dark and heavy. He opened the security camera system, something he had never bothered to check all this time. Video clips played one by one. The first images seemed normal, Melissa smiling, Evelyn carrying a tray of food. But then, the next scene stopped Richard's breath. He saw Melissa snatch a towel from the girl's hand, forcing her to re-wipe the floor over a tiny water spot. Another clip showed her locking the basement door, leaving Evelyn standing in the dark. Another time, Evelyn sat at the table, a plate of untouched rice before her, Melissa standing with arms crossed, coldly walking away. Richard turned off the screen, holding his head, leaning back in his chair. The sound of last night's rain seemed to still echo in his ears. He opened a drawer, taking out a small blue notebook Martha had found in Evelyn's room. The notebook was old, pages curled, with childish handwriting. "New mom says I have to learn to be better. I try every day so Daddy will be proud." The next page had scrawled writing. "Ethan is the only thing that makes me happy. I'm scared of Mom, but I can't be scared if Daddy video calls." At the end of the notebook, Richard found an old envelope with an elementary school logo. A letter sent weeks ago from Evelyn's teacher. "We notice Evelyn often falls asleep, flinches when touched on the shoulder, and avoids interacting with friends. We hope the family will look into this." Richard folded the letter, placing it on the desk. He sat silently for a long time, speechless. Martha stood at the door, looking in, eyes sad. "You didn't see because you were always rushing," she said softly, then walked away. In the afternoon, Richard went to the school to withdraw Evelyn for a while. He drove slowly, the two children in the back. Evelyn hugged her teddy bear, sitting still, looking out the window. Ethan leaned on his sister's shoulder, breathing lightly. Richard glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing his daughter's face clearly thinner. At the therapist's office, the doctor, a middle-aged woman, greeted them with a gentle smile. Evelyn needs time, not just treatment, but importantly, a sense of safety. When children lose trust, they withdraw even from those who love them. Richard nodded, voice low. I understand. I won't let her be afraid ever again. Evelyn sat nearby, hands clasped, looking at the floor. The doctor leaned in, asking gently, What do you like to do most, Evelyn? I like to draw, but I'm not allowed anymore. You're allowed now. You can draw whenever you want. Evelyn nodded, eyes brightening slightly. On the way home, Richard drove in silence, only hearing the rain fall steadily on the glass. When they arrived, he settled the children in their rooms, then returned to his office. He opened his computer, writing a letter to the board of directors. I request to step down as chairman indefinitely. The vice president will act as interim. I need to dedicate time to my family. I owe my children their childhood. That evening, he read a story to Evelyn. His voice shook near the final lines because he had forgotten some parts. Evelyn didn't turn her back as usual. She lay still, eyes open, watching her father. You read it wrong, Daddy, she said softly. I forgot how to tell stories, he laughed awkwardly. It's okay, Dad. I just need to hear your voice. Richard paused, set the book down, and stroked her hair. I'm sorry for leaving you alone for so long, Evelyn whispered. I'm not mad at you, Daddy. I'm just scared you'll go far away again. I won't go anywhere. The next morning, Ethan woke up, his temperature down. The boy sprawled out to hug his sister. Richard made milk, bringing it up to the room. Evelyn sat by the bed, cutting colored paper to paste into a rainbow shape on the wall. A rainbow has 7 colors, right, Daddy? That's right. I want to draw an extra color for Mom. Which mom, daughter? My real mom. Richard nodded, looking at the wall where small pieces of paper were forming an arch. I think your mom would be very proud. At noon, Richard called Claire, an old friend who used to work with Melissa, who had once subtly warned him about her character. Thank you for telling me, even though I didn't believe it then. Claire replied, You still have a chance to fix it. Not everyone realizes as soon as you did. Late afternoon, he went to the backyard. Evelyn and Ethan were playing. Ethan sat in his wheelchair, Evelyn pushing him along the stone path. The laughter of the 2 children rang out softly. Richard stood still watching, hands clenching, then relaxing. Martha walked up, holding a cup of hot tea. I haven't seen the girls smile since the new mistress came here. Now it's different. Thank you, Martha. Without you, I wouldn't have known where to start. It's good that it wasn't too late. She needs you. When the sun went down, Richard prepared dinner. He let Evelyn choose the dish. She picked the meat pie her biological mother used to teach her. Richard made it clumsily, flour sticking all over the table. Evelyn laughed for the first time, a real laugh. Ethan clapped, mouth covered in flour. Richard laughed too, then sat down with his children. We will relearn everything from the start. Night. The house was peaceful. Evelyn slept on the sofa, Ethan lying next to her. Richard stood at the window, looking up the stairs. The light in the nursery was still on, casting a glow into the hallway. He whispered as if to himself, From now on, Daddy will be home. The clock struck 9. Richard turned back, pulling the blanket over the 2 kids. In his line of sight, the paper rainbow on the wall reflected the lamplight, shimmering. Evelyn stirred, murmuring in her sleep, Daddy, tomorrow I want to keep drawing. I'll buy more colors for you. You have to promise. I promise. Ethan turned over, grabbing his sister's hand. Richard looked at the 2 small hands interlaced, his heart feeling lighter for the first time in months. He sat in the chair, leaning his head back, exhaling deeply. Everything wasn't over, but at least this time, he knew where he was supposed to be. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Only the gentle sound of wind through the trees and the steady breathing of the children remained. Richard closed his eyes, hand still resting on his daughter's shoulder, ensuring this sleep was real, and that he would not leave this roof ever again. In the weeks that followed, the Carter house gradually changed. No more urgent phone ringing, no emails from the board appearing in the middle of the night. Meeting schedules disappeared from the desk, replaced by Evelyn's drawing papers and Ethan's small toy cars scattered on the floor. Every morning, Richard prepared breakfast himself. He mixed milk for Ethan, boiled eggs, and cut bread, occasionally spilling milk on the table. Evelyn stood beside him, helping him wipe it up. "You have to wait for the water to boil before putting the eggs in," she said, voice small but firm. "I forgot. I've never done this. I'll teach you. I need to be taught how to be a dad again, too." Evelyn didn't answer, just smiled. After breakfast, Richard drove the two kids to school. No chauffeur, no secretary tagging along. On the road, Ethan played with the window button and Evelyn looked out the window, hair blowing in the breeze. Arriving at the school gate, she turned back, whispering, "Remember to pick us up early." "I promise." A small promise, but the girls' eyes lit up. Every afternoon, after school, they walked around the lake behind the house. Evelyn pushed Ethan's stroller, teaching him to pronounce words. "Say ball. Ba." "No, it's ball." Richard walked slowly behind, listening to his children giggle. That sound, something he had forgotten for years, now became the most important part of every afternoon. The therapy sessions happened regularly every week. White room, soft light. Evelyn sat in the chair, twisting a hair tie. The doctor asked, "Do you dream often?" "Yes, I see cold water and rain." "In that dream, who do you see?" "Mom. Not my real mom, the other one. I'm scared of her." Richard sat next to her, his hand trembling slightly. He didn't interrupt, just squeezed her small hand. Evelyn continued, "But when I wake up, Daddy is there. The cold water disappears." At night, Martha prepared meals, Evelyn helping cook. The smell of baking filled the house. Richard mixed dough, unaware he was using too much milk. Flour splashed onto his white shirt, and Evelyn laughed. The first real laugh he had seen since she came to live here. Ethan clapped, shouting, "White flour! Daddy's covered in flour!" Richard laughed loud. "Well, now you have proof Daddy is the clumsiest in the house." The kitchen that used to be heavy was now flooded with laughter. That dinner, no dish was perfect, but the three ate it all. Martha stood in the corner of the kitchen, watching, discreetly wiping her eye. The next day, Richard took Evelyn to an art class for children. The teacher handed out paper, asking, "What do you want to draw?" Evelyn replied, "I want to draw home." When the class ended, she brought back a picture with a rainbow, a sun, and 3 people holding hands. In the corner, she wrote small, "We are safe now." Richard looked at the picture for a long time, then put it in a wooden frame, placing it in the living room. The following mornings, Richard practiced braiding Evelyn's hair. He made a mess, hair tangling in the comb. Evelyn laughed. "You don't need to make it pretty, just untangle gently." "I think I'm untangling too hard." "I'll teach you, bit by bit." In the evening, when the kids were asleep, Richard sat in the living room, looking at the wall. On the wall where a stain used to be, he and Evelyn repainted it pale yellow, the color she chose. "Why did you choose this color?" "Because it's the color of sunlight. I want our house to have sun all day. Then I will open the curtains every morning. I'll write a line, okay?" "Of course, write whatever you want." Evelyn took a marker, writing small in the corner. "Home can start again." Richard stood looking at those words. For the first time in years, he felt something in his heart soften. Evelyn's birthday approached. Richard didn't throw a big party, didn't rent a restaurant or buy expensive gifts. He stayed home, hand-making a small wooden frame. Inside the frame was the first picture Evelyn redrew, the rainbow, the house, and 3 people laughing. That morning, Evelyn woke up to find the frame on her table. Underneath was a small card. "Happy birthday. My gift is my time. Today I do nothing but be with you." Evelyn held the frame, hugging it to her chest. Ethan crawled over, mumbling, "I have a gift too. I made a cake out of clay." The boy held up a crooked cake with a toothpick stuck in it for a candle. Richard bent down, rubbing their heads. "This is the best birthday I've ever had, even though it isn't mine." They ate breakfast in the kitchen, sunlight streaming through the window, reflecting on the frame. Evelyn hung the picture on the wall next to the dining table. "Put it here so I see it every morning." "Do you want it higher?" "No, here is just right, so Ethan can see it too." In the afternoon, they went to the lake behind the house, releasing paper boats Evelyn had folded. On her paper boat was the line, "Thank you for coming back, Daddy." Richard held the paper, reading slowly, then looking at his daughter. "I never went far from you. I just forgot the way back. But now you remember." "Yes, and I won't forget again." When the sun set, they returned home. Ethan was tired, slumped on his father's shoulder. Evelyn walked beside, holding the small frame. Crickets chirped in the garden, the smell of baking still lingering in the air. That night, before sleep, Richard read stories to the kids. His voice was deep and slow, no longer trembling like before. Evelyn listened, head resting on his shoulder. Ethan mumbled along, words not fully formed, but full of effort. When the story ended, Evelyn whispered, "Daddy, why isn't Mom here anymore?" Richard was silent for a moment. Because sometimes grown-ups choose the wrong person to trust, but what matters is we still have each other. "Do you ever feel sad?" "Yes, but looking at you and your brother, I can't be sad for long." Evelyn pulled the blanket up, voice soft. "I think real Mom would want to see this." "I think so too." When the children slept, Richard sat quietly in the yellow light. He looked around the room, once proof of pain, now the warmest place. Just below the words, "Home can start again," the light reflected as if the wall knew how to smile. He whispered, "Love isn't being perfect. It's knowing to be present when others need you." Evelyn turned in her sleep, vaguely saying, "Daddy, tomorrow I want to draw that picture again. I'll sit next to you. I'll draw you laughing. Then I have to practice laughing correctly." Richard smiled softly, bowed his head, kissing his daughter's forehead gently. Ethan slept beside, hand still clutching his father's shirt. Outside, the night was calm, wind whispering through the trees. A year passed since that rainy night. The house on the hill no longer bore the cold look of the old days. Every morning, sunlight poured through the door frames, reflecting on the pale yellow wall, the wall Evelyn had chosen the color for. Martha still woke early, preparing breakfast. Ethan had learned to sit in his wheelchair independently, legs weak, but eyes bright. Richard kept the habit of taking the kids to school, no more emergency meetings or sudden flights. That day, Evelyn's school held a children's art exhibition. The teacher called to invite Richard, saying Evelyn had completed a special painting. Richard hung up, turning to his daughter. "What surprise are you planning for me?" Evelyn smiled, hiding a paper behind her back. "Just come and you'll see." Ethan sat nearby, raising a hand. "I'm going too. The whole family's going." In the afternoon, the gallery hall was crowded. Colorful paintings hung on the walls. Martha pushed Ethan's chair while Richard held Evelyn's hand. When they reached the center area, they stopped. Before them was a large painting, framed in white wood. Below was a small plaque reading, "The day my father came home." In the painting, a man knelt down, embracing a girl and a small child in a brightly lit kitchen, floor streaked with water, rain falling outside. In the corner, text written in small strokes, "When someone truly sees you, you come alive." Visitors stopped, some taking photos, some standing silent. Richard stood before the painting, hands clasped, speechless. His eyes rested on the raindrops painted on the glass. Claire, his old friend, approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Now she believes in the light," Richard nodded, replying softly, "So do I." Evelyn turned, looking at her father. "Daddy, does it look like us?" "It does. But the most beautiful thing is you have forgiven the past." "I'm not scared anymore." "I know." When the exhibition ended, Evelyn ran playing with friends in the courtyard. Ethan sat in his chair, waving to his sister. Richard watched from afar, eyes relieved. Martha smiled. "They look truly happy." "For the first time in years, I see our home truly happy," he replied. Returning home that evening, the family prepared dinner together. Richard let Evelyn choose the music. She picked an old song, one her mother used to like. The voice rang out in the kitchen, light and warm. Ethan tapped his hand to the beat while Martha set plates of pie on the table. "Daddy, today I want to cook a dish," Evelyn said. "What dish?" "Pasta. Mom used to make it for me when I was 6. "Then I'm the assistant chef. You just need to taste." Evelyn carefully stirred the boiling pot. Richard sat nearby, watching her turn, grab a spoon. Add salt, every movement slow but confident. When the dish was done, she placed the plate on the table, flashing a smile. "Try it, Daddy." Richard took a fork, tasted a bite, then nodded. "Tastes like memories." "I guessed you would say that." They sat around the dining table. Ethan looked at his father, suddenly speaking clearly. "I like our house." Richard turned, hand pausing in midair. "Can you say that again?" "I like our house." Evelyn cheered, hugging her brother. "Ethan can speak." Richard laughed, his eyes wet. "You are doing great." After the meal, Evelyn ran to get the small frame hanging on the wall. "Daddy, can we switch places for this picture?" "Where do you want to put it?" "On the kitchen wall, the old spot." Richard looked around the room, once a place full of fear, now bright with light. He nodded. "Okay. Right there." Evelyn hung the picture, adjusted it straight, then turned back to look at her father. "I think this wall has forgotten all the sad things. Maybe it remembers, but only to remind us we made it through." Richard opened a cabinet, taking out an old wooden box. He placed it in front of his daughter. "For you." "What is it, Daddy?" "Grandpa's medal. He wore it when saving people in the war. You keep it, to remember that courage doesn't just belong to adults." Evelyn opened the box, metal reflecting the light. "I don't know if I deserve it." "You deserved it a long time ago." Ethan leaned over the table. "Do I get a medal?" "You will, when you learn to walk on your own." Ethan nodded, a smile spreading across his small face. When the table was cleared, Evelyn turned back to touch the yellow wall. "Daddy, our house knows how to smile now, right?" Richard didn't answer immediately. He looked at the two children, then at Martha folding towels. Finally, he smiled, speaking slowly. "Yes, and so do I." Martha turned on the lights. Golden glow covered the kitchen. Ethan started humming along to the playing music. Evelyn stood next to her father, hand still on the wall, eyes shining with peace. "What do you want to do tomorrow?" Richard asked. "I want to plant flowers out front." "What color?" "Lavender. Mom said it smells best when the weather's warm." "Then tomorrow morning we plant." Ethan raised a hand. "I water." "Okay, but don't get your sister wet." "I'll try." The whole family laughed. Amidst the laughter, Richard looked around. The kitchen that witnessed pain now bustled with warmth. He knew those memories wouldn't vanish, but they had become the foundation for a new beginning. When everyone went to their rooms, Richard stayed back alone. He looked at the painting, "The Day My Father Came Home," hanging on the wall. Below was the line Evelyn wrote by hand. "Love doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be real." Soft footsteps sounded behind him. Evelyn ran over, hugging her father. "I forgot to say goodnight." "Good night, daughter." "Daddy, I think Mom is somewhere watching us." "I think so too." Evelyn left the room, closing the door. Richard looked around the house, listening to the small laughter still lingering. He breathed deeply, then walked toward the stairs. Outside on the porch, wind blew through the blooming lavender, the scent drifting. In the once cold house, the kitchen light remained on, illuminating the face of a father, two children, and a true smile. The smile of a house that learned to smile.